Lana Shehadeh, thank you so much for being with me. I'm grateful.
Thank you for having me.
You know, there are obviously so many perspectives. We hear so many things, and
Right.
nobody can inform us like people who actually live in the area. You are a Palestinian woman, an American
Yes.
Palestinian woman, and you are living in the West Bank at this time. Could you explain your story? Tell us your story. It's going to be very interesting for people to know where you come from. You were born in the United States. Tell us your
Right.
journey, where you are now, what you're doing, and then, of course, we'll get to the part where and so many people want to hear your opinion of what's happening right now.
Yeah, so I am a Palestinian American. I was born in Rutherford, New Jersey. I grew up in South Florida, Parkland, Florida. And I went to school there, went to college, but we did visit Palestine quite often. My family, my mom and dad are both Palestinians. I met my husband while I was in Palestine. We ended up getting married. So I did have a close tie to the Palestinian territories. But now I decided to return on a research trip. So I'm completing my PhD in the US in politics and international relations. And part of my research is really looking at these recent normalization deals between Arab countries, specifically in the Gulf region, and Israel. So I'm here working with a professor at Hebrew University doing research. And I'm here with my two little girls, and we've been here for the past 10 months.
Now,
yeah, just to clarify, we are in the West Bank in a town just north of the geographical image of where we're at.
Your parents were born in the West Bank?
Yes, my mom and dad were both born in the West Bank. They left in the 70s. And have been in the U.S. ever since. All of my siblings and myself were born and raised in the U.S.
And you were getting your PhD with an American university, through an American university?
Correct. Yes, a university called Florida International University in Miami.
And your husband is a CPA?
Yes, my husband's a CPA. He's an accountant, and he's currently actually located in the U.S. in Florida, more specifically.
Oh, he's in Florida right now?
Yes, yes, yes.
How is that for you guys while all this is going on?
You know, him and my family have just been extremely worried. We're not in Gaza, so the extreme bombings that you're seeing in the news, we're not experiencing, but we are in the West Bank, and we neighbor a very large Israeli settlement called. So there are clashes, and they're very close to my home. So my parents and my husband have been just extremely worried, but we're safe. We're okay. Thus far, we are safe.
How have you felt, not only personally, but also as someone getting your PhD in international relations, even though I know your focus was not specifically on Palestinian-Israeli relations, obviously,
Right.
personally and professionally, you must have a lot of perspective. What were your thoughts until what's going on now? What are your thoughts now? And where do you feel, particularly as someone who is an academic on the subject, how do we get out of this mess? What is the way forward?
Right. So as an academic, you know, everyone is welcome in my classroom, right? I have Israeli students, I have Palestinian students, I have American students. So everyone and their opinions are welcome in my classroom. And I do feel like I'm able to have a fruitful discussion with anyone. But recently, I think the past month, it's not that my perspective has changed. I just think that whether you're an academic or not, you're just sitting here very helpless. You do see the different perspectives on the issue. In the end, we are all human. People do want to lead normal or somewhat normal lives. But I think when you're here and when you see what you're seeing, you just become very helpless in this idea or this notion of like peace talks or normalization of relations become, it's just a lot more grim. This idea of peace becomes a lot more grim, unfortunately.
I was speaking to a gentleman today who is part of the sort of Washington establishment, and he was using words and terms, and I said, it's just too late. Those words are just sounding very stale now. You're going to have talks, you're going to send an envoy, you're going to, you know, obviously the sense is this time is different. Something's got to change. There's a sea change. What do you, as a Palestinian-American woman, what would you, if you could change things, How would you change them? What would it look like? How would we get there?
You know, that's a loaded question, and it's very difficult to answer, but I think I'm going to try to give you a sense of what we go through on a day-to-day, just so you understand how deep-rooted this issue is. Obviously, the past month, most people have been talking about the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood in East Jerusalem and also the bombings in Gaza. But let's go a little bit deeper. Let's talk on a very local or municipality level. If I want to renew my passport, I need Israeli permission. If I want to leave jurisdiction, I need Israeli permission. If I want to leave the West Bank or enter the West Bank, I need Israeli permission. There is no such thing as Palestinian autonomy. There's no such thing as a PA that is autonomous of the Israeli entity. So as Palestinians, and by the way, my American status has no reflection on my existence here. So because I am of Palestinian origin, when I enter or exit the lands of Israel, which we say that West Bank is occupied by Israel, so it's considered the same.
Right.
My American passport has no value whatsoever, nor does my daughter's passports. If we want to enter or exit any area, we are asked for our Palestinian ID cards or our Palestinian national numbers, and we're treated like Palestinians. And in essence, that's second or even third class citizens, unfortunately. So this is very deep rooted. You know, we could put the settlements on the side, we could put the violence on the side. This idea of a day-to-day life is non-existent for Palestinians outside of the Israeli establishment. So I don't even know how to tell you what that would look like. It's so hard to even imagine. So in front of me, so I'm in an area, like I told you, we're north of. So our town is split into areas B and C. Anyone who understands the Oslo Accords split the West Bank into areas A, B, and C. So we're in areas B and C. What's in front of me, right outside of my kitchen window, is area C. So it's bare land with an Israeli settler road. So anytime Israeli military presence enters our town, I can see it from my kitchen window, which is why we tend to be affected by it. Behind me is area B, and we have a Palestinian refugee camp filled with Palestinians who had left in '67 from Gaza or were kicked out of their homes and live in horrible conditions. I mean, if I were to take this laptop and show you what I see behind me, it's not livable, right? They have horrible sewage systems. They don't always have access to electricity, and they don't always have access to water. So this is a lot deeper than this idea of just violence or evictions or whatever. We don't live normal lives, and we're in the West Bank. That's nothing near how horrible it is in the Gaza Strip. So I couldn't even answer that question for you, Marianne.
Well, we have to start imagining what happens now.
Correct.
We have to. When you say you couldn't, we must.
Right.
I mean, that really, we must. And if it's not people like yourself, and
right.
all people, Jewish, Muslim, Arab, Israeli, West Bank, Gaza, if we must begin to conceive
correct
of how things could change. There certainly must be a conversation where you are among your friends, including among Israelis that you know, right, who live. Is where do people see hope?
You know, right now, the discussions, just like I said, have been very grim. So most Palestinians that I know here in my town and in the neighboring town who are both Muslim and Christian, right? Because Palestinians in the West Bank, there are a significant amount of Christian residents. Some of my neighbors are Christian as well. There are no discussions with Israelis, at least in the vicinity of like the Ramallah area, because we don't have access to that, right? The only Israeli presence we see as Palestinians in the West Bank, limited to the West Bank, is the Israeli military, right? That's the only discussion you have. So what kind of conversations do I have in the West Bank with Israelis? On a checkpoint when they ask me for my ID. Sometimes they're pleasant, sometimes they're very harsh and rude, and you know what I mean? I tend to have different conversations because I go to the Hebrew University, right? So one of the Israeli professors I deal with, Hillel Cohen, he's very open-minded. We have these discussions quite often. But he's an older man who's lived through most of the wars between Arabs and Israelis. he sees no hope either. I mean, that's how negative it's become. You have Israeli settlements that are growing by the day. I neighbor an Israeli settlement that in the 90s, when we used to come visit with my family as a kid, I mean, it was a few homes and some trailer parks and things like that. It wasn't very developed. It is a large city now with universities, supermarkets. There's a hotel. That is not the development we have in the West Bank. And I can't even blame the PA, because the PA can't even enter our town comfortably because we're under Israeli control. So you know what I mean? It's really in the hands of the Israeli government. It's not in the hands of the Palestinians. I could tell you what I hope. Will that ever come to fruition? I doubt it.
And your hope would be?
My hope would be that Palestinians are treated like human beings. I do not want to be stopped at checkpoints. I do not want my little girls to see men in full Israeli armor. I do not want my little girl crying when we pass a checkpoint because there's a young man with an M16. I just don't want to see that anymore. Like, that's how basic we've gotten to. I can't even tell you, I hope to see a Palestinian state. Hopefully, maybe. I just want my little girls to go to school daily. By the way, this past week, so our school weeks start on Sunday and on Thursdays. My girls have only gone to school today, and they came home early because there was shooting on the Israeli settler road from, an Israeli Jeep. So I just want my girls to be safe. I don't want them to see guns. I don't want them to see military Jeeps. And I just want them to have access to go to a park comfortably. At this point, that's my expectations are very low. It's 9 p.m. My girls are asleep right now. Marianne, all my windows are shut because I'm nervous about the tear gas bombs, because every time they shoot them, if I have a window slightly cracked, my home is flooded with that tear gas bomb, and my girls start waking up and I have to put onions to their nose so they're not coughing so much. You know what I mean? These are girls that grew up in South Florida. It's sad.
You were saying before that your parents and your husband, who is now in Florida, where your parents are, I assume, must be very concerned about where you are. And
very, very, they're very concerned. I definitely downplay it when I speak to them, but they're very concerned.
When you spoke before about how you really don't have much contact, you have much more contact in Florida with Jews, American Jews, than with Israeli Jews. And of course, that's what has gotten so much worse over the last few years. When there was hope was when there was so much community. There were so many Arabs with the Israelis, with Jews with Muslims, etc. So when you say that the conversation is grim and it's almost like you don't even know what to hope for going forward.
Right.
Is that can't be where the conversation ends, though?
Of course. So the thing is, like I said, there's so many layers, right? So when you speak to Palestinians who are both Muslim and Christian that live inside of Israel, whether it's in Jerusalem or different parts of the northern parts of Israel, they tend to talk about this idea of like equal access to jobs and opportunities. They tend to feel like second-class citizens. They don't feel like they have the same rights, but they definitely do have more conversations with Jewish Israelis. Right. But the discussion tends to be that they feel like they're treated very differently. When an Israeli knows that this individual is of Arab descent, let alone a Muslim woman wearing a headscarf, you're not treated the same, right? In the West Bank, like I told you, it's a little different.
You were saying how Palestinians within Israel, what do you call that, Lana? Do you call that, if you're referring to Israel, not the West Bank occupied territories, how would you refer to that? Just Israel?
Right. So I tend to call it Israel proper. Many people call it, others might call it the Zionist state. Others might call it the lands of 48. I mean, I am an academic. On the map, it's Israel proper. I mean, that's, I do call Palestinians living in the lands of 48 or in Israel, Palestinians in Israel, right? I know that, many Israelis would call them Arab Israelis, but no, these are originally Palestinian, right? Their parents are identified as being born in Palestine. These are Palestinians. So that's how I would identify them.
When this is all when this particular chapter of things is over,
Right.
will you want to remain where you are, or will you want to go back to the United States?
I don't know. So when it first started, I was getting very nervous and I was ready to take these girls and just head home, right? Because home for me, it still does remain the US. I mean, there's no question about that. But, you know, there is something about life here. Palestinians are very hopeful. They are well educated. The kids are just, they understand that education is their only way out. So you tend to feel like women are highly educated, which is interesting because when I lived in the US, I felt like I had to constantly defend myself as a Muslim woman, right? There's this perception that Muslim women maybe are more submissive, but this, what you see here is completely different, right? The number of buses that leave this small town straight out to Birzeit University are filled with women, right? Women are highly educated. There are many daycares because a lot of women in this town work full time. So I really do like that kind of effect on my girls, as opposed to the way I grew up in the US, which I had a lot of opportunities, but I always felt like I was on the defense. I felt like I had to constantly defend myself as a Muslim woman growing up in Parkland, Florida. That's not a very diverse part of the US. So I do like that, you know, I like my girls to grow up in a very international setting where they might feel a little more comfortable with their identity. But my family lives in the US. I'll be back and forth regardless.
Well, talking to you has been very, very moving and very meaningful. And I know a lot of people learned a lot on many levels from the things that you said. Thank you very, very much. Please take care of yourself.
You too. Thank you so much.
I'm praying for you. All my
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.